We talk a lot about fixing what's broken in this job, but sometimes the most powerful thing you can do as a leader is just to see what's already going on right. Know Your Force is a simple system that sends a quick text survey to the people you interact with. It's helping leaders see the good their teams are already doing, back their people with real data, and step in before stress turns into burnout. Learn more at knowyourforce.com. Law enforcement and government agencies struggle with parking citations, often because no one will pay them. Boots or other devices are costly, and they invite confrontation when implied and later removed by enforcing employees. With Tire Tag, you can avoid many hurdles and ultimately promote public safety and revenue collection. To learn more, visit tiretag.com. For a thorough conversation on how Tire Tag can help your agency and revenue collection, visit episode 204. That's 204. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Welcome back, everyone. We frequently talk about what police need, police performance, what our teams need, what our culture needs. We're talking about leadership, connection to the community. And today we're going to talk about all these overlapping themes. We're going to talk about support. And frequently, if you ask cops what they need, and this is verified through regional surveys and resources like Police One, what cops need or what they perceive they want, it's like support, right? And that comes in a lot of different ways. That comes from internal leadership and culture and morale. It also comes from external, right? A lot of us got into this job because we want to be for the community, but we also just want the community to know and see us and understand us. So I'm excited to talk about all this intersection. Today, my guest is Scott Lowry. Scott, thank you for coming on the show, and we're going to talk about some of these dynamics and some strategies and some tools to address all of it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Scott, can you tell us a little bit about your background in coming into this law enforcement, let's call it the fold, or sometimes it's the fray, but that is really part of your story. And with Know Your Force, right? Like KNOW, like know your force, like know the people that are out there protecting your streets.
Yeah. So I don't have a background in law enforcement. My father-in-law was in law enforcement for 30 plus years and just made a large impact on me. And yeah, the way that the company came about was actually in 2019, I got my dream job at Adobe, was super happy, worked there for a year. And in July of 2020, got let go due to COVID. And I was really bummed out. And I knew I wanted to do something bigger and better than just work for a tech company. As I looked around, I actually ran into a buddy at a 4th of July party who was running a K-9 unit. And I asked him, hey, man, like, how are things going with everything? And he's like, oh, I just got back from a week of training. I'm really excited to get back out on the street. And I was pretty shocked. I was like, oh, wow, I didn't expect to hear that. And I just got done running a global training program at Adobe. And so a light bulb went off. Oh, my gosh, how many training hours do you do? And he helped me understand that K-9 officers do about 3 times the amount of training as a normal officer. But a light bulb went off. Oh my goodness. What if we were able to get training data out to the public and let people know how much training you're doing? Maybe we could give officers a break by, having everybody be aware of the hard work that you're doing. So from July 2020 to January 2021, talked to lots of chiefs and sheriffs. And it became apparent to me that training data gets out to the public. But what I was hearing from the community was, hey, we want to know how people feel about us. So our idea was always to have someone scan a QR code and learn about their force, learn about, who's pulling them over, who they're having interaction with. And we pivoted to provide feedback after that interaction. And we had a hunch that from everybody we know in law enforcement, there's going to be a lot of good anecdotes that we could pull from. So it was kind of an interesting idea, but we launched it in 2021. We had a handful of agencies across the United States look at this as a community engagement program. And, to pull, surveys and to get feedback. And it was pretty interesting, but there wasn't a requirement behind it up until, 2023. at least here in the state of Utah, where Utah passed a bill requiring everyone have an early intervention system. And the data that we were gathering was a
Hmm.
post contact feedback, which was what we would see as the best early intervention data point, the most common. It's pretty difficult for someone to take the effort to find a police website, to find the commendation form, to fill out everything, and then to hit submit. But if someone gets a QR code at the end of an interaction or a text message after an interaction, we see that it's an easier way to entry and to get a lot of good feedback. And so it's been really encouraging over the last little bit, as I'm not in law enforcement, like I mentioned, but to be able to bring in simple technology to help officers see the good that they're doing. It gives the chief a tool to say, hey, small attaboys while they're walking through the halls. Hey, we saw this come through. We saw this. It's not a full formal complaint. So a kind of interesting way to get into the space, but man, has it been very encouraging and awesome to see all the good feedback we've been able to help gather.
Yeah, no, thank you for that overview. And I think that that's like really impactful for those that were not around law enforcement prior to becoming in law enforcement. I mean, I was one of those where, I had a neighbor on the other side of the giant loop that I knew like the dad was a cop, but I never saw him because weird cops work a lot. It was intriguing, but I'd never really had any face to face. And then it really wasn't until much, much later that I started thinking about this job, but I didn't have any real like resource or kind of peek in. And then you mentioned your father-in-law being a big impact to your life, and in prior conversation you're like, man, like he just kind of helped me grow up. I think it's really intriguing that you have that connection, and then you're seeing arguably the most difficult time in many of our lifetimes. Anyone listening to this is 2020, right? 2019, COVID, George Floyd, like all of these things that rocked the nation, the world, not just law enforcement as an industry, but certainly law enforcement at the intersection of that. What are your thoughts on like where that came from, and just wanting to kind of help illustrate the canine, right, as an example, the training aspect, and what cops do, what they do to do their job well?
Yeah, I think subconsciously my father-in-law helped me grow up a lot. And when I was seeing all of this craziness on, the news, I was like, this isn't what I've felt. This isn't what I've seen. This isn't the
Mm,
people that I know in law enforcement. And so I
yeah.
guess I was a little frustrated and my brain started spinning like, hey, how can we help? How can we help change the perception, And how can we do that at scale? And always being in public or private sector, I know that data speaks. And so my initial idea was like, hey, where's the data today? What can we pull on? And then how can we get this out to the public? And that was really, I wanted, for my buddy that runs the canine unit, I wanted everybody to know how much training he did and how much he actually cares. I think that
Hmm.
that message has been lost, that law enforcement, aren't there to care. And it's like, no, they are there to care for the community. And so I really wanted to pull that sentiment out so that people can see it. And this is how we've done it, is to be able to gather that feedback and then get it out, through the chain of command. And we do have some public facing dashboards that some agencies use to kind of show, right, hey, this is what our community feels about us, and here's the percent positive of our interactions, right? So I think that's the real reason behind the product.
Yeah, that's said so well, and I think that that would resonate with so many people because we get into this job because we care about something bigger than ourselves, and there's a lot of like similarity. I like how in that crisis moment in time when you're like, man, like what can I do? Like, and you see what you see, but then you hear all the stuff and you see in the news, you're like, well, that's not my experience. That's not what I know to be true based on people in your circles. Similarly, that's where Blue Grit came from, was 2020 and just all the negativity, and me just wondering, well, what can I do to affect that? And I love how you came in at this point of just of truly knowing and caring, and then wanting to just kind of show that. Um, we're going to get into the surveys. I want to ask kind of or talk over some of those dynamics, because as you talk about reviews or surveys, yeah, there's so much nuance to that. And an example is that my police department rates, and they have a similar type of response where there's a program where you get a survey after certain types of calls, right? And then the ratings that come in, month to month, because I see these reports are like 4.5 to 5, right? They're like high fours generally, consistently. And when we take ourselves out of that, we're like, okay, like if you go to love looking at Google reviews for somewhere to eat, right? if you go to the Google reviews, like 4.5 or high, like that's solid. Like that's a great spot, especially it has a volume of response. However, and this is every police department I've ever had to look up to route there for training or what have you, right? Or find contact info. The Google review is not great because it's almost like what we're gonna get into, I'm sure, and some of your input there, which is if people are going onto Google to rate a police department, something did not go great. And I'm not saying it's I'm not saying who's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's a very select uh, group of people going on there, whereas people are not going on to Google to rate a police department saying, you know what, they knocked it out of the park. I was in my worst moment and they like went above and beyond. They solved the case or helped my daughter. I just have nothing but love. Like they show in other ways. But yeah, I'm going to turn the mic back over, and I kind of want your thoughts on those dynamics.
No, that's exactly it. Is the barrier to entry to provide good feedback is very, very hard. To find the right police department, then to find the right page, and then typically you have to put in a lot of information, right? If you're submitting anything to the police department, they need pretty much your blood type, your social security number. I mean, they need a lot. Joking aside, right? It takes a lot of
Yeah, yeah.
effort, and so when we take away all of that barrier to entry and have an officer pass out a QR code where someone can easily scan, or someone receives a text message. Right now, we're still in the age where providing feedback on law enforcement's unique and weird. And so people are still engaging with it at a higher rate because it's new. People are kind
Mm-hmm.
of sick of providing feedback on almost everything else. But with it being law enforcement, we're seeing the engagement be higher just because people are kind of shocked. Like, wait, I get to provide feedback? This isn't a formal complaint. You don't tell me I have to put my name, right? So that's really what we've seen is when you can eliminate that barrier to entry, you get a lot more feedback. And yeah, we can customize it to where if you get this call, they get this type of survey. But overall, we see that an officer passing out a business card with a QR code on it is very, very unique and very different. It's a very different way to end an interaction. And I'll tell you from experience, and I talk to agencies daily, they will put the QR code, that business card in someone's pocket when they take them to jail. And when people get out of jail, they'll scan the QR code and provide feedback. And it sounds crazy, but we've got 5 years worth of data that says this is happening and it's going to continue to happen. And so it's kind of twofold. It's making it easy, but then it's also ending the interaction differently, saying, "Hey, I know I just wrote you up for a citation, but hey, can you understand, why? And we're interested in your feedback on how we're supporting the community. Scan this QR code, and we're eager to take that feedback to heart." So it's kind of twofold. It's making it easy, but also ending an interaction differently, right? That's where we're helping change the culture. When the chief likes our idea, then we bring it to the front line. They're all like, "What? I don't want to get feedback." And then we show them, "Hey, well, look at the feedback from other agencies. You're going to want to get this as well because the stat that we really stand behind is 80% of interactions are positive. And we've seen that across the nation. Yes, it ebbs and flows, and inner cities might be a little bit different than rural communities, but there again, we come back to why someone is in law enforcement, and it's to help their community. And that's what we see is when that's the root of what they're doing. When we can gather enough data, that comes out that they are there to help.
Yeah, that's huge. I'm not a statistician or into statistics. I don't even know if I said that right. But we know that if you have 100 police contacts and 3 people elect to do the survey, or they go to the website and they fill out the just the generic civilian review form, even if it's good, it's not accurate. Like we can't rely on 3 out of 100 to make an inference on something. However, yeah, when you have a QR code, when people are getting a text, that is way more frequent, especially when you're like, this is just how we do business. And it's a dynamic of law enforcement to be defensive. I totally understand why. Look at body cams. I mean, most places, until you knew cops in the region that had them early on, and then that said, hey, you know what? This actually gets us out of a lot of trouble because you know what? We know what we do. We know why we do it. We have nothing to hide. The same as someone standing over there, 10 yards away with a cell phone, getting their cell phone recording. Like, cool. Please record and please don't edit it out to, get out all the beginning part. But truly, it is because we have nothing to hide. We know what our colleagues and our buddies are doing. And yes, even when you say 80%, where my head goes to is we go to not great days. And if it's 80% and a lot of the people being surveyed are they were detained in handcuffs, they had to be yelled at because, there was a fight about to break out. And ultimately, like that's still a really solid grade. I think so it just to recognize that this is a tool and really when we take a step back or zoom out, when we're talking about what we're doing and why we're doing it and the support and wishing we had more public support, this is absolutely the same thing, the same conversation. And that's how we get that data and that understanding to people out because they have a way to contact back in and provide that. I mean, we hear feedback and we think different things, but it's just how do we get that information back, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think we're really just trying to give officers a chance to get good feedback. Right now, there isn't mechanisms to get good feedback outside of, like we've mentioned, those formal complaints. And so this gives the officer an easy way to get those day-to-day calls, that are positive, where they are helping someone, because that's the majority of what they're on. Yeah, there's some really difficult calls, but the good definitely outweighs the bad from what we've seen going up on now, I guess, 6 years worth of data, right? That really has carried true. And, to change gears a little bit, when we see, systems get put in place like early intervention systems, when Utah passed their bill, they're really looking for formal complaints, use of force reports, training reports that weren't completed, whatever it may be. A lot of it is they're looking for negative indicators to know when to pull an officer in and have an intervention. And we try to flip that on its head and say, how about you have early intervention points as to when this sergeant should become lieutenant, when this officer should become a sergeant, because you're seeing all of these small things. Oh my goodness, this is us pulling someone in for the good. And so that's really how we try to look at it, is like, yeah, there's been systems to track use of force reports. We've been looking at body cam footage for 5, 6, 10 years, I think looking at the positive is really what's needed here. And when we see that, we're also seeing that it's helping people make it to retirement. And that was a big a big
Mm.
unlock that we saw this year, where someone said, yeah, we were seeing an officer trend downward, and we were able to catch it early and help him see where he was doing this. And now he's back on the road to retirement. And so it's catching the positives, but also if there is negatives, catching it early, and putting it in play with what they're doing well. Maybe it's a shift. Maybe they need to move from here to here and leverage their skill set where something, negative isn't going to happen. So I think that was the other piece that's really big, is there are systems to kind of track officers. They're typically looked at in the negative light. And we're trying to say, hey, sure, we can track the negative. But if we're going to track the negative, we better be tracking the positive as well to balance those scales, right? To show that full 360 of an officer.
Yeah, yeah. Let's I want to peel that back a little bit more. We'll start with the negative piece that you just mentioned because yes, early warning systems, and that's a phrase or kind of a concept that a lot of folks have heard about, a lot of different variations of that. And even before a lot of companies are offering that type of, you know, dashboard or whatever you want to call it, it would usually be things like complaints founded or unfounded, right? It might be policy violations, counselings, it might be collisions, it might be general use of force, which might all be legal and justified. And so I think it's just an opportunity for those that might feel defensive to say, hey, the antiquated old school systems don't give you a full picture. However, when you're looking at every incident, like literally my kid's lost and you showed up and you and your buddy like found the kid in the house hiding, like playing hide and seek without telling anyone, like
Yep.
right away, like that's a great opportunity. No one hears about that stuff, but that is the job, right? So it's just highlighting a more accurate view. And then also, and this is a conversation I've had with some of my sergeants before, like the conversation is generally that sergeants want to know when complaints are happening with their guys, even when unfounded. And here's an example where if someone was not found to be driving or speeding outside of the norm, but they kept getting complaints, even though they're unfounded, but no one else is getting complaints, he's like, hey, I want to talk to my guy and just let him know, because he might be kind of on the edge and not realizing, hey, he's just driving a lot faster than everyone else. Or just for awareness, like, hey man, like you're going to those calls and it's really legit, like is there a reason why you're not putting your lights on? And maybe it's a newer guy that's just like, yeah, I just don't know what the norm is, right? So it becomes an education piece, not a counseling piece, not a misconduct piece, and you're nodding your head. And I think that is kind of a point, right? Because again, going back to the old school version, it's things have happened and they may be legit, they may not be, but now we're saying, hey, you're in the warning sign. We have to have a conversation. And now you're in somebody's office. You may or may not be in, in this danger zone of whatever, but it's just kind of just these data points that suggest that we should have a conversation, which is not necessarily helpful to anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you're speaking, a lot of what we see is that officer, had a rude tone, and a lot of that, like if someone has a rude tone, they're not going to put in a formal complaint, unless it's very
Yeah.
egregious. But when we see those small anecdotes, hey, the officer helped me understand that his tone was a little rude, and when we see that, that's like that's something that's a very very simple conversation. Hey, we're just seeing your tone. We know stuff's stressful. If you could just be more aware of that small thing, that small tone, if they change that, we all know how that could definitely de-escalate a situation that
Hmm.
they're going on. And so those small anecdotes, if you can see them in the right way and action them, they can be very beneficial, rather than, some of the other data points that are like, there's a lot that has to go into understanding, a full use of force and, was that justified or not, right? There's a lot of time. And so this can be an easier way to keep those, to keep a pulse on things. I think that's another phrase I've heard chiefs use is like, hey, Scott, sometimes I don't open up the dashboard, but I get your daily email that lets me know the average rating and the percent positive. And that lets me keep a pulse on things. And if I see it drop, then I know to
Hmm.
go in, right? And to dig in. But those indicators need to be easy to digest. And when they're not, then they're not useful.
Yeah, that's a great example, right? Just the tone. I mean, anyone in a relationship has been there in the on the home front where it's like it's not what you said, it's how you said it. And
Exactly.
I mean, this is critical when we're talking about crisis intervention, we're talking about leadership. So much of it is communication, and we're always talking more and more about emotional intelligence. And a lot of people might roll their eyes, but hey, this is a thing. It's literally, do you have people skills? Do you have human being skills? Is probably a more compelling way to market it sometimes. And we all have grown a lot in just living life and getting life experience. However, that first piece is self awareness, right? And so if people don't know that they have RBF, resting boss face or resting bro face, or, the more PC versions, like I definitely have it. And I knew that, right? Like I knew that at a point that when I'd get serious or really focused, like my brow goes down, I'm not smirking, I'm not smiling, and I'm not mad, but I look mad. And it wasn't until a series of different interactions, right? It's being in the roll call briefing room, it's being in a meeting, it's being on a call where people are like, what's wrong with you, right? Like, you okay? It's either you're okay or why are you looking at me like that? And then I'm like, oh, I'm enough people are saying it. I'm looking at someone a certain way. And so, what a great opportunity before it becomes a thing is just, hey, you have a couple people giving feedback, like, I don't know why this officer was mad at me. And you're like, I wasn't mad, right? And your sarge is talking to you, and your sarge has an opening to say, you know what, when you walk around, ask around, like, um, ask for the honest feedback and say, like, yeah, sometimes we don't know if you're mad or not. But with time, we've been working together a couple years. I know you're not, but I can see why that new member of the public might.
Yeah, and something we've changed just in the last year is we've allowed officers to see their data. So for the last few years, it was really a leadership tool, and really just leadership had access to it. Leadership, would send out, the positives or the negatives, and it was really just at chiefs, sergeants, lieutenants would kind of look at the data. And with the bill being passed in Utah, we changed it so that officers can log in and see their data. And we saw that when they're
Hmm.
able to see it, they actually change things before a sergeant says something. And we're like, oh my goodness, that's actually what the bill and all of this was for, right? Is letting officers see
That's
it,
what you
letting
want. Yeah.
officers take that change, on their own rather than having them, do something. So officers are able to go in and see their data and identify those trends before a threshold gets hit, a notification gets sent, right? And on the flip side, they can also download that and go to go to their sergeant and say, "Hey, look, I need to be going here. Look at all of these positive things people are saying." So we're also giving officers a tool to analyze themselves and pick up on trends, but also be able to give them something to improve their career. And I think that's something else that's been interesting to see, right? Is they've been able to leverage these pieces of feedback internally and say, hey, look at what these people are saying about me. Can I have a chance being, moving into a detective role or something, right? So exposing that
Hmm.
data to leadership is mainly what, a lot of the policies around. But if we can expose it to the officers, they can actually take it and run with it from what we've seen.
Yeah, that's huge, right? It's that ability to self-audit, and you're removing the need to micromanage when you do that, right? There's a lot of officers that would just want to know, right? Kind of like I've heard this conversation in a lot of different departments, which is to say, hey, if I get a complaint, I want to know, even if it's BS. Like, tell me, right? Like most people want to know, and so this is another example of that where, hey, if I'm looking at things and then I see my dashboards reflecting not as great, it's going in a direction that's not ideal. And then I might take some personal inventory and be like, man, why is that? Man, I have been stressed. And I do remember that one time I mouthed off to that person a little bit. I did apologize and I owned it and I talked to my sergeant. But regardless, outside of that, there's these other incidents. And yes, I am very stressed because of family stuff, what have you. And that is a much better maybe road to recognizing wellness strategies. And do I need help? Are there different resources? Do I need more time away from work? Right. But I love how you highlighted that reflection on career mobility and opportunity, because this just popped in my head because a lot of folks talk about the shortcomings in promotional evaluations. And yes, there's peer review, there's different components, there's the assessment, but then are you a good test taker? And a lot of conversations that come back to whether it's promotion or hiring is how do you measure for EQ? How do you measure for emotional intelligence? And I'm just going on a limb here in the moment. I'm curious your thoughts, because there are a lot of people that and experts that say you can't measure it accurately. There are a lot of experts that say you absolutely can. There's different tests and things. But what a thing to consider is if you have an officer that is highly productive, writes a lot of great cases, has a good peer reputation, and has a high volume of contacts and interacting with the public, and that is really high, even with a high arrest, like you're getting this snapshot to like, man, now I am getting more of a accurate 360 view of like, who am I promoting as a leader? Who has earned it and is going to model the things I want as an administrator, as a culture. So I mean, like, what a thing to consider as far as like part of the review process.
Yeah, I think the way that we've looked at the review process is almost in like the FTO. It's actually at the very beginning, right? Like having an FTO, like go out and pass out business cards, you're training them the right way. And so when you're training them the right way and you can immediately get that feedback, then you're able to kind of keep them on that right track. But when you don't have those systems set up in place at the beginning, it can take some time to analyze things differently and to really get that full 360. And so, I think when we're looking at it, it's really, how can you expose the data, expose the trends? And I think with the emotional intelligence, some of what we are missing that body cams can get is just being able to track tone over time, right? I think that can really tell a lot. And our tool doesn't necessarily do that. There's awesome tools like True Leo, and some other tools that do have some really awesome ways to kind of track, non-common, you know, um, non-common elements that can kind of, help you understand if someone might be ready for a leadership role or not. And I think ours, if it starts early enough, those trends are easy. But sometimes you would have to look back through the data to be able to kind of put together that story there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I did have a note to zigzag a little bit, but back to the positive interactions and what Know Your Force can allow people to capture and agencies to capture, because I can think of a lot of examples where I literally looked over to my wife. I'm like, that person was legit, right? It's a store clerk, it's a server at a restaurant, like dealing with an angry table next to us. I was like, man, that person like amazing. And I actually had several intents of like figuring out what their name was, and I forgot, or like I was like, man, to call back and figure out what shift that was on and like tell the manager, and is the manager going to capture it? Similarly, I have a suspicion that there's a lot of, let me put it this way, there's a lot of positive feedback that comes back in without an officer name. It's just like, hey, this happened on such and such date. Sometimes you can track that back, but it takes work. And so,
Mhm.
one, sometimes you can't track it back, and you're like, oh, no one's getting the credit, but it's good that someone took the time to write this nice email to the public inbox. But then other times, knowing human nature and people getting busy and not wanting to, let's say, do a full scale investigation to find out this like vague kudos, is they're not gonna, some bosses aren't gonna look and figure out what call happened in this window and match a phone number and a potential email to like someone that called. So someone else isn't getting the credit where credit's due. So just my nod to like how that can help capture that.
Yeah.
I do kind of want to ask you about surveys, because so much of a quality of a survey depends on the types of questions being asked and how they're asked, right? And so, is that something that you've built over time, or agencies participate with, as far as what is being asked and the verbiage in there?
Yeah, we can speak to that. And a lot of, just being in the private sector for so long has helped me understand that they've got to be, short surveys. That's the first thing. I still go to police departments' websites and I'll still see, like 20 questions. And it boggles my mind that that's still a thing. So I would say, yes, we do provide
Yeah,
guidance on that. We do have examples over the last few years that we share with departments, but our tool is more or less a form builder. And so you can build whatever survey you want. And the biggest thing that we allow for is dependent logic. It sounds so simple, but a lot of surveys out there in law enforcement don't have dependent logic. And what I mean by that is when you select 5 stars, you get a different set of questions than when you click 1 star. And so that's the first thing is we can initially engage or evaluate the interaction based on a 1 or 5. And every 1, 2, 3, 4, they can all have different sets of questions. But then inside that, if you answer something a specific way, we can have different fields, be exposed. And that allows us, like, if someone's engaged, then sure, you can ask them more feedback. But if they're not, right, then just continue to keep it short. So we have a pretty standard survey that we ask. And then as time goes on, we typically see that the departments will adjust based on what they're getting and what they're not getting. If they're getting a lot of general feedback, so what you were just talking about is someone coming in saying, oh, I don't know that officer, but they want to leave some kind of feedback. We have a general feedback that we gather, and that just, kind of goes to the overall department, their department health. And if an officer's name is mentioned, we can, of course, reassign that to the officer. But outside of that, if you know the officer's name, or if you scan the QR code and it goes directly to them, then you can ask, you can get more specific. If it's coming from our SMS survey, that is where we can have it be dependent on the call type. So if it's dependent on this call, it's a more serious call. Maybe we need to have some more qualifiers in here. Or if it's a different type of call, maybe we can be a little bit more lax and we don't need as much information. So the tool we have is a form builder. They can build whatever they would like. We do have standardization that we have there. And we typically see it gets updated more or less yearly. We really like to keep it out in the field, see how much we can get, and then make small adjustments. And I would say
yeah,
for the initial and maybe the first version, we're pretty included in that. We help kind of consult them through, maybe what some options are. But then after that, the internal team is pretty good at making adjustments on the fly when needed. But hopefully that answers your question. Just with that dependent logic is something that's been a big changer for us. It's not just a hey, give a survey, and then from there you have to pull out a positive or negative. That initial indicator of 1 to 5 stars then dictates the questions that are asked.
yeah. No, you hit it on multiple angles. One is that it's not just a standard same questions for any type of call you get. At the same time, there's an adaptive nature. You're helping to build the surveys. Also, if they answer this, then it peels back more. And then the last piece of like collecting data, which is consistent with everything I've ever heard, which is like you can't keep tweaking it, right? Or you're not going to get good data sets. You got to let it sit for a little bit. So I love how you hit on that too.
Yeah, last thing I'll say actually is we also have it dependent on the rating. We can redirect the user, which there again, it's just like simple stuff that a lot of other, technologies aren't using. But if someone has a positive interaction, my goodness, why wouldn't we redirect them to a recruitment page and say, if you were happy with our team, are you interested, or do you know anybody in law enforcement that could continue to help your community? And so that's really fascinating. If someone leaves a 1 star, well, then sure, maybe we do push them to a formal complaint form where there's all these required fields or something, right? Or maybe it takes them to the chief of police page and they can learn more about the chief and send the chief an email or something, right? So there's some other pieces of what we say is like continuing the conversation. And that's been fun. We've had a few agencies, actually, if someone leaves a 4 or 5, it takes them to a page to download their local app. So now we're really connecting the community. Like, hey, if you had a good interaction and you want to stay up to date with law enforcement, and so we can connect a few things, right? If we can make it easy to engage, hopefully we can keep the community further engaged.
Yeah, I love that. Man, we covered a lot of ground. We've hit on support, right? So like knowing your people, this is basic leadership tenets that's it's easy to hear and conceptualize theoretically, but harder to put into practice. But you've illustrated a lot of the ways that of the tools where cop bosses, leaders can really know accurately like the work that's being done. So like you know the good work that your people are doing, you know opportunities for training, and also you know truly like what our customer base, right, our civilians, community members are feeling, thinking, and what they're receiving, right? Like, do we need to push out more community education programs because of the information we're getting, right? So a lot of actionable information. At the same time, yes, we are connecting with the community, giving an easy route because these days any extra step is a hurdle in today's age of just busyness and right all these dynamics. So I appreciate you walking through from all these different angles. Scott, is there anything that you'd like to close with and kind of let the listeners know, and for sure tell us where they can find out more and get in contact?
Yeah, I think just want to say thank you to anybody that's listening. I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate your effort that you're putting into this. Staying in this job, through 2020 has been very difficult. So thank you for what you're doing. I really love being in the ecosystem and just working with people that care about their career. Yeah, if you're interested to learn more about us, we just updated our website recently, so you can find us knowyourforce.com. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn as well, so you can find me, Scott Lowry. Would love to connect with you. We're always interested to understand what technology you're using and how can we help infuse our data into your existing system. So I'm always interested to just talk with leaders that are trying new technology because I think it's needed. I think we need to keep bringing simple technology into the public sector.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott. Thanks for answering the call that you saw and helping us out in that regard.
Exactly. Thanks so much for having me, Eric. Really appreciate what you're doing, and your show's awesome.
Thank you. Absolutely. Hey, Grit Nation, I got a couple things I'm really excited to share with you. The first is that the newsletter, free newsletter, is now live. All you got to do is go to bluegritwellness.com to subscribe. It is basically a summary of everything good and gritty for the week, including some exclusive content specifically on the newsletter. That'll include wellness information, nutrition, things that you ask, Q&A, as well as updates about Blue Grit, offerings, news, things that'll help you out. Next order of business. For years, I've been asked what kind of nutritional supplements I use because I've been into learning about health, nutrition, fitness for so long. And for years, I landed on NutriCost. And it's only a recent thing that I've been an affiliate, but now I get to pass the savings on to you. So if you go to NutriCost.com, use code BlueGrit, that's just BlueGrit, you get 10% off. Literally just a couple items, you get free shipping. And the reason why I found it was because it was always the best quality for the best value. So I always recommend people look at the ingredient list, look out for things like sucralose. It has the lowest amount of unnatural ingredients if you're looking for that kind of thing, whether it's your whey protein isolate, which I toggle on and off of, or organic vegan protein to cut down on different chemicals that I just generally like to avoid. It's not just protein, it's creatine and minerals, vitamins, things like L-theanine and magnesium, which I use regularly to help my nervous system power down. It aids rest and recovery, promoting better sleep. So whatever it is, go to NutriCost.com and you can just enter the code BlueGrit to get your 10% off. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.